Hi, everybody. It's Mama Kate coming back at you from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And I am thrilled to have this next person talk to us today. They have so much insight and information about the band world outside of Winnipeg and across Canada. And I can't wait to hear what their stories and journey has been like. So without further ado, special guest, who are you?
Hi, Joanne. It's Wendy McCallum from Brandon University in Brandon, Manitoba.
So what is your job out there?
Well, I work as a professor of music at Brandon University School of Music, and I am teaching graduate and undergraduate conducting, music education at the School of Music.
How long have you been doing that for?
Well, I have been at BU for 16 years. So I've been teaching the symphonic band for those 16 years and just have been blessed to enjoy that period of time with some wonderful students.
So how did you get there? What was your journey? I would say even before you got the job that you have right now, going way, way, way back in time from baby Wendy, what was your musical journey that got you to this point?
Well, little bit of truth. I started taking piano lessons when I was younger. I didn't start super early, but I started taking piano lessons, and my mom and dad really made a commitment to organizing an instrument for me to play and to take lessons. And I had two fabulous piano teachers, and I also had my elementary music. And I always credit my favorite teacher was my grade 2, 3, 4 teacher, and her name was Mrs. Struthers, and she played the piano. Now, she was responsible for our music classes, and we did things like we had choir and we did square dancing, and we had this amazing time. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is such a great thing to be. And then I took piano from those fabulous two ladies and joined band in 7th grade at Benito School up in the Parkland region. And I was there for a number of years, grade 7, 8, and 9 in band. And then I had the fortune of joining the illustrious Swan River Band program with Tony Klein and Willie Connell. And I really, got some fabulous opportunities. The band there marched in the Bombers games with our field show, and before I arrived they would do European tours. It was a very well established program, and there are many other grads around the province, of course, who were a part of that program or remember that.
Before you go on, Wendy, what do you play? What was your band instrument?
Very good question. I actually played the saxophone. I still play the saxophone. And so I started on saxophone. I initially wanted the French horn because Judy Bartel played it. And I still remember to this day, she also did a music degree at Brandon University. And I remember just hearing her model it when I was in 6th grade. We were sitting in the gym at the high school, and I just remember the sound and being, wow. And I felt that way right up until I heard that I couldn't play it in jazz band at that time. And I was like, what? It's not in a jazz band? Although Judy did play in jazz ensemble, but I guess I had it in my head. So I took the saxophone. I had a Vito saxophone, paid $385 for it. It was a big investment for my family. And so I started on the saxophone, but my band director, grade 10, 11, 12 was Tony Klein. And he started me on some flute, and he started me on some trumpet. My brother played the trumpet in his band. And so that was my main instrument. Now, I actually started at the university as a piano major, and I did that for my first 3 years, right up until I traveled to Europe for a year. So because I speak French, I wanted an opportunity to follow through with that. And so I went as an assistant to a university in just outside of Versailles, and I was there for a year. And during that year, I didn't have easy access to a piano, some limited access, but I had access to a wonderful saxophone player from the Paris Conservatoire. So he was teaching out in this little community where I lived, and so I took lessons. He said he would give me lessons. I didn't have a ton of money, but he would give me lessons if I agreed to play in a quartet that he had. So that's what I did. I got free lessons and I played in his quartet. And I would go to these fabulous publishing houses in Paris and go through the music and got some repertoire. And so what I ended up doing is when I returned after that year, I re-auditioned as a saxophone major, fourth year concentration. So I switched into
Saxophone teacher there.
Bob Ford was actually doing flute and saxophone at that time.
And in
Yeah.
Paris?
And in Paris, you know what's really funny? The saxophone, it was not I wasn't with Claude DeLong or anything. He was one of his students, and I don't even remember his name. Like, this was 1990. So I'm sure I could dig it down somewhere, but yeah.
Cool.
So that was my time, but it was a fabulous opportunity for me to fall in love with the instrument because it's what I had. I had taken my saxophone with me and I really fell into it in a way that I never dreamed I would do. You know, I played a lot of saxophone in my undergraduate because of who I was there with, some beautiful players like Brian LeClaire and Roger Manti, and a piano teacher in Winnipeg, Lee Houghton. She was in the section with me in the jazz ensemble. And we had great times with that. And by the time I had that time in Paris, I felt like it was the thing to do. So I actually finished my last year of my music degree as a saxophone major. And that's what I pursued then. It was actually a bit of a kickstart because I was able to study saxophone in my master's degree with Gordon Brock, who was a Cinta student from Michigan. And I really, finally started to figure out, how am I going to negotiate this instrument? So that was a blessing. And then when I was in my doctorate at the University of North Texas, I was in a quartet that was coached by Jim Riggs, who is a longtime saxophone teacher at UNT and recently retired. So it's kind of the saxophone journey from my time in Swan. But when I left, as I mentioned, I actually went to be as a piano major and then switched over during that year. Yeah. And then when I was shopping for graduate school, it's a question I get all the time from people who are interested in doing more studies, like what do I do? And so I sat down and I just said to myself, like, what are the things that I wish I knew more about? A lot of students start thinking about graduate school when they're still undergraduates, but it's so important to have some time to sort of think, about what. And one of the things that was on my list was I want to be a better communicator on my instrument. I want to be a better saxophone player. So that's why I selected the University of North Dakota, was because Gordon Brock was the band director at that time, and he had been a student of Cinta and agreed that he would do saxophone lessons with me in addition to the conducting. So that was just a blessing to get a chance to do both at that time. And ironically, after my first year there, he took the deanship at the University of North Florida. So I had him for that first year. And then they didn't have graduate programs, so I wasn't about to follow him down south. The climate change might have been very nice, but I was at home one night. It was 5:00 in the afternoon, and Einar Einarsson, who was the chair of the search committee for his replacement, called me and said, we are going to do an interview tomorrow with a new director of bands for the University of North Dakota. The first thing happens at 9:00 tomorrow morning. Can you be here? So I was on the road by 8:00 that night and drove, up until about midnight and got there and was there for the interviews the next day. And that's when the University of North Dakota hired their present director of bands, Dr. Jim Popejoy. So I was very lucky to stay there and get a chance to be a part of Jim Popejoy's legacy at the University of North Dakota.
That is wild.
Yeah, and that's actually what led me down to North Texas, because Dr. Popejoy had just finished his studies at the University of North Texas, and so as part of his first year at the University of North Dakota, he had a conducting symposium and brought Eugene Corporon up to be our clinician. And at that time, I participated in the symposium and just learned so much from Professor Corporon and felt like that would be a good next step for me. And that's how I ended up down there.
So what lit the fire for you, though, to go into education, educating young band directors? What got that going for you?
Oh, well, I was teaching in Nipawa. So when I first started teaching after finishing at Brandon, I taught in southern Manitoba in Blumenort, famous as the school where Cameron Friesen, the minister in our provincial government now, was for 15 years. So I was there right before Cam Friesen was there, and then moved up to Neepawa Collegiate. And when I was at Neepawa, I really, really thought it was a great job. I loved my job there, but I also became increasingly aware of what I wished I knew or what I had as a different skill. And what I found as my main obstacle was some of my communication skills. I could write great papers in 2 languages nonetheless, and I would find myself on the podium going, and we'd be rehearsing the whole suite or to Kelly Cajun folk songs, and I would have an idea and we'd get better, but we'd get to a point and we'd go to festival and we always did fine, and we'd get great feedback from adjudicators, and I'd think, why didn't I think of that, or why didn't I hear it that way? And so I decided that I wanted to go back to school, but I didn't know anything other than, as I mentioned earlier, about why do you go to grad school? You go because you have some goals that you want to reach, and mine was to be a better communicator. And once I got into the program at the University of North Dakota and had a chance to interact with the faculty there, I got starting to think about how it is that we think, how it is that we hear, how it is that we process sound, and that we analyze music and how music works. And then on the flip side of that, getting a chance to work with great teachers like Gordon Brock and Jim Popejoy about how people are motivated and what they're listening to and how we direct their listening, and just watching great teachers on the podium. I had a chance to watch Frederick Fennell conduct the University of North Dakota All-State for 3 days solid in Grand Forks. I videotaped every minute of it. I have VHS tapes on my shelf. Or to watch, watch those rehearsals as an active member. I played French horn, actually. I got back to my horn in the second band at the University of North Dakota. So that's the university band. It's a lot of aviation majors, and I played French horn in that group. And I played the timpani in the orchestra when Gordon was doing it, and I played saxophone in the top wind ensemble. And I watched high school directors. I watched university directors, and I just started to really sort of have lots of questions. And one of the best things ever was my graduate research class. We had to pick a topic. And I was thinking around what I'm most passionate about, and it's music education. I've always wanted to be a teacher, right from my first year of music. And the topic that I picked was significant conferences and symposia in North America in the 20th century. And so I went through all these microfiche and all of these old music educators journals and teaching music journals, and just looked at all of the things that was done with the Ford Foundation and the Young Composers Project and Manhattanville Music Curriculum Project and the Comprehensive Musicianship Project. And I looked at all of these, the Juilliard Music Repertory Project, all of those things, and all of the great ideas that we were completely ignoring. It just struck me so strongly that there were so many things that we're just not processing and that we were overlooking in the things we were doing. So I think that was kind of a first twitch, and then when I went to University of North Texas, in my cognate area is music education. So I got to work there with Daryl Ramsey and Deborah Rohr, who were their music education instrumental folks at that time. And they were just amazing in terms of their knowledge base and the history of how music education has evolved and instrumental music and the movement away from the military and the retired military musicians teaching to music schools and the training of teachers from the artist performer paradigm to the music educator and the lens shift and what we do take and don't take from all that. So it just all kind of ruminating at that time for me. So I knew that when I was graduating, that any job that I would take, I wanted it to be a position where I taught both large ensemble and music education. Yeah.
Well, your joy and passion for it is very obvious, and anybody who's ever been around you at any festival or any kind of gathering of music educators knows that you are in it for real.
Yeah. I do love it.
So I'm super, super curious about this next question. Of course, and I always have to say this, it's my disclaimer, it's a family show. What perhaps is one of the strangest gigs or jobs that you have ever been involved in, Wendy?
Okay. Well, I will tell you the strangest musical experience, and then I'll tell you the weirdest gig. The strangest musical experience comes from my dad. Now, when I have to tell a mom story too, but my mom, when I was growing up and it was time to practice the piano, she'd always say, you go practice the piano. I'll do the dishes. What every young woman in the 1970s wanted to hear, right? It's like, I'll do the dishes, you go practice the piano, right? Talk about motivating. So my mom listened carefully and she would say things like, that was better that time, or I'm not sure that one's quite right yet. Very meaningful feedback for a kid who knows, but needs to know someone else is listening. So I even use that with my own kids sometimes. It's okay, I'll do the dishes, which is one of the things that we've stopped with COVID-19. We've stopped using the dishwasher. We only wash dishes by hand as part of our family time, right? So that was one of the things. But with my dad said, I think it was either the 40th anniversary or 50th of his university graduation. I think it must have been his 40th. Yeah. And it was down in southern Manitoba. And so all of these classmates come together and celebrate their graduation from the University of Manitoba as Aggies. They've all graduated from agriculture. So my dad said, come on, you got to come down for this. So bring your saxophone. We're having a play along. So I take my saxophone and I get there. And the only other musical instrument is an accordion. And so I ended up playing. So for the band directors out there, you do the transposition. So accordion plays in A lot. So here I am, on these tunes that they'd sing them through once, and then I'd play along. And some of them I knew, and some of them, I don't know, they were, the fight songs from the 1960s from the University of Manitoba songbook. So that's probably the weirdest playing thing I've ever done, is duets with an accordion. But in terms of the strangest gig, this is hands down one of the coolest things, but also the most unique. So for the last 15 years, I've been a part of the Con Brio Music Festival in Whistler. And it's a wonderful festival run by a couple of really dedicated folks. And one of the things that they do is they do a mass band. So I'll say that again, so you can process the idea of a mass band at a festival. So they do a mass band and a mass choir and a mass orchestra. So if you think of a band as having at least 14 oboes, right? And 200 flutes and 120 trumpets, and just keep adding them up, right? Well, there's somewhere between 12 and 1,400 players the one time I did it. And they eventually have moved to have the group in 2 groups so that they're a little bit less than 1,000 each. But I have done it when it was between 12 and 1,400. And they usher, literally in 5 minutes, they get the entire ensemble in, and it's the coolest thing. And the year before I did it, the Doug McCauley and Sue Magnan are the 2 folks in charge. And Doug said, will you come in and watch this? And Dale Lonis was doing it, the mass band that year. And Dale came out and he did a couple of things and I watched very carefully. And then I went and listened, and it's held in the Whistler Conference Center. And I just went and I stood against the wall of the Whistler Conference Center and just felt the walls boom. And I just ran over in amongst the tuba section and just listened to the sound. I mean, it's absolutely fabulous. And one of the things I remember from the second time I did it, it was Captain Clark, Matthew Clark from Winnipeg. He was doing one of the songs and I was doing the other one. And so I was first. So I did a few things. You know, when you have 1,000 people in a group, you have to make sure they can see you and that they can play quarter notes in time and that they can think about what an expression, a gesture of volume would look like. And it was great. It was an amazing experience. They did really well. We were playing a beautiful piece of music by Bob Buckley. And after it was all over, I packed my suitcase up and then I head to the shuttle stop to get the bus back down the Sea to Sky Highway to head back down to Vancouver for my flight. And I run into some kids that had just come out of the mass band, and we were all grabbing a sandwich in Tim Hortons before we had to go. And they're talking, "Oh, that was so amazing," and you know, that wasn't that cool to do. They were talking away, and of course, you know, I engage with them and call, "Oh, you enjoyed that, yeah?" And he was, "Oh, we were just in a mass band," she said to me, because of course they wouldn't recognize me because I'm so far away. So you're so far away from the musicians that they can meet you literally and have a conversation on the street. They have no clue that you're just, you know, the person they were just watching, the little speck you were watching. But that is clearly one of the most unusual things that I've gotten a chance to do.
I can't even imagine how powerful it must have felt. Like you said, it almost sort of pushed you against the wall, right? And I can imagine you felt it from your toes all the way up.
Yeah. And I know I've talked to directors about it, and, you know, there's things that could go wrong. You know, the seating could be problematic, or the balances could be funky, or, you know, they could fall apart very easily, but it's shocking how amazing it sounds. And the chaperones and the parents, you know, they all come and watch, and it's literally life-changing for those kids. If you can imagine, because there'll be kids there that come from programs with 26 people in their high school band, and then other bands that are there with 140 in their program. And so for those kids to be a part of that larger picture and to feel the energy of that, and the same is true with the choir and the orchestra. It's a fabulous experience for them. Yeah.
Oh, I hope one day to get to see that.
Yeah. Or play in it.
Or play, exactly. So what advice do you have to any students who might be watching and thinking about going into music as a career?
That's a great question. And the first, you sent this question to me ahead of time. And the first thing that I started to think about was something I've participated in for a lot of years, which is the Take Your Kid to Work Day. So I've been mama to a lot of young men and women who were ninth graders and thinking about music, and they've come in and had a set of questions, you know, at the end of the day to ask me, and they've always say, you know, what do you think is the best part of this job? And I always, you know, can answer that without hesitation. You know, I was warned before I went into music, don't make your hobby your life. But for me, it's worked out slightly differently, which is make your hobby your life and you never work a day in your life. So I've been lucky that way. But my advice to the kids is you do music because it's irresistible, right? You do it because it's irresistible. And when you're looking at the world and the slate of the world, we want to study science. We want to study literature and history and geography, and we want to read great works about things that are unrelated to our main area of study so that we have a deeper understanding. But when you come back to music as the thing that gives you that pleasure, that's the most important thing. When I went to France, I was mentioning earlier, when I went to France, it was actually with the intention of leaving music.
And I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it was. And I was just really at a point where I wasn't sure it was the right thing. And I had gone into music as pre-law. And, but after my first year, I was so hooked. And after my third year, I was starting to think, oh gosh, I don't know. And so I bought all the LSAT books and I headed off. But exactly as I explained to you, it was that exploration of the saxophone as a mode of communication and a mode of, you know, intrapersonal knowing that for me just changed my life. And so I switched my thinking from, yeah, I could be a lawyer to, yeah, no way, I couldn't do it. I can't live without music. And so I guess that advice is, it's got to be irresistible. And then the second piece is, most of what I've been thinking about, or a lot of what I've been thinking about, has been about habits over the last number of years, about the way that we feel our own sense of presence and the way that we develop habits. And so the advice that I would have is, develop very successful habits now. Develop those habits in self-care, develop those habits in practicing, in your own interpersonal knowing, in healthy relationships with your friends, in getting your homework done and learning how to make schedules. All of those things, anything that you can cultivate those positive habits in, because I think more than ever before, we realize the way that the brain works and the way that the brain's plasticity can grow and develop our own ideas. So that to me is really important. And we get a lot of those habits from listening to and watching great musicians and great scholars and great colleagues that inspire us. I can literally also say that I also learn a lot of those great things from my students. Life when you're younger feels like you spend so much time looking up, and then there's all of a sudden one day you just sit back and you say, oh my gosh, look at that thing my student has done. And I have, so many opportunities to see people do amazing work across the country, around the province, and just look back and think, wow, what can I learn from that? What can I see from that? What have they done that I can take? And that whole attitude of just learning something new every day. One of the most humbling things that I've done was learn to ride a motorcycle. And the reason is, it was so foreign to me. There was nothing comfortable about that. And I became so vulnerable in that process that I learned a lot about myself, about what it was to get a new skill and to put myself in a place where I'm not comfortable and where I have to think and react. And that's a big part of how I teach my ed classes, my methods classes. You have to remember the state of mind of a young learner. You and I, Joanne, we can't look back and say, oh, life without music. Oh, well, let me tell you about that. I can't tell you about that. My dad sang Marty Robbins in the truck to me on the way home from town. I stood beside my parents in church. I had Mrs. Samchuk and Mrs. Struthers in elementary music taking me on rhythm band and square dancing and choir. Music has always been a part of who I am. And whether it was, everyone could argue, I suppose, that maybe I was just more attracted to it and that I was more sensitized to it. But I just think that we can be inspired so many different directions,
What you said about leaving and then coming back to music really spoke to me, because I as well, after 3 years, said adios because I was like, I was really doubting if this was what I really wanted to do with the rest of my life. Even though I went and I worked in a music store for 3 years, full time. After those 3 years, even though they were great, I was like, no, I need to go back and do this. And I actually went back and auditioned as performance. Said, I'm going to go back, and not only am I going to go back, I'm going to go back with a real purpose. Mm-hmm. Right. And that fire really has never gone away for me. So right. I'm with you 100% there. Sometimes you just need that little bit of distance to remind you just how much it means.
Yeah. And I actually think being in a foreign country made a big difference to me, because it's exhausting to be processing in a second language all the time. And you get home at night and you're exhausted, but then everything's different. Like, what do you mean I don't have a dryer here? Like, no one had a dryer in France. It was expensive for the electricity, And what do you mean I can hardly afford meat? What is this couscous I'm eating constantly, And so everything was different. I had to decide, okay, what is important to me? I was on a limited budget. I wanted to travel, and I really had to pick and choose what I could do with my money and with my time. I had lots of, so Wednesdays, every Wednesday I went to Paris. That was life defining. I went to the south of France 3 times, and all of those kinds of things that I would go into those environments and say, wow, time in Salzburg. Like, how do you spend 2 weeks in Salzburg and not be transformed, So just seeing what it is that you want to be a part of your life and you don't want to be a part of your life, and as you move forward. And it's so interesting because in spite of that, I've been back to Europe one time since then. I keep saying I wanted to go to Paris in this next year because it's now 30 years since I was there. But I've really created a connection with, different communities and different parts of the country, and we're drawn to things. It's a fascinating way to see the ways that life changes us and what we begin to value.
And in these times where life is definitely changing us, do you have any extra last little bits of words of advice that are maybe helpful to people to sort of help keep us on track and moving forward?
Well, last summer I was at the University of Toronto with Jeff Reynolds and Jillian McKay doing Jillian's Fabulous Wind workshop. And there was a woman who was there, and she said something very interesting while I was with her on the podium. She said, it's exhausting to see how people feel they really need to curate their lives. And I really have thought a lot about that because don't have a social media presence, and I very carefully have thought about the way that interacts with my world. And I realized that one thing that really is important to me is my tribe. So I feel like I have identified my tribe, and I feel like my tribe is ever shifting and growing, and I'm so fortunate to have this collection of people in my life that I maintain a contact with. I stay connected to them. I support them when they need support, and I gain inspiration from them constantly. And I learn something new every day just by having them as my team. And I just want to really say that a big part of that is not feeling like my life needs to be anything specific. It's really important that we're just open to whatever our life brings us, and learn from whatever it is that we do next. And I'm always talking to my kids about what mistakes are. It's nothing wrong with a mistake. Just let's go. It's an important part of the guided critical self-reflection. Like, let's keep going forward. So I guess that's my advice. Get your tribe in place and spend time with people who have the same priorities as you. Have people to look up to, whether they're older than you, and don't restrict your life to people that are just close to you in age or in profession even. Having that diversity of professions and ages, and just as diverse as possible.
Wendy, we are so lucky that you decided to make Manitoba your permanent home and not go off and teach in Paris. And even though when this is all said and done, I'm sure you're going to rush out there and come back. But yeah, we truly are so lucky to have you. You're an incredible part of our music education community. And I hope that more people get to experience the magic that you bring to everything that you do.
Thanks, Joanne. I really appreciate it. Thanks for doing this.
Have an amazing rest of your day.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.